By the end of the 70s, Enzo Ferrari was a living legend of motor racing. He had made his name a brand. His team was one of the most representative of Formula One, with the best drivers in the competition. He garnered admirers and commanded respect. Despite being 80 years old, he adhered to a strict routine. He would arrive at the factory in Maranello, a northern Italian town, at 11 antemeridiem. First, he would talk to the workers to get a real overview of how the work was going. That way, he could detect any deception when he spoke with the technicians a few minutes later. He would stay in his office until 2 o'clock and usually had lunch at Il Cavallino, a restaurant located across from his workplace. He usually ate with a collaborator or a pilot. If he noticed a professional was underperforming, he dismissed them without hesitation. At 17 o'clock, he would meet with other members of his team and end his workday at 21 o'clock. Before returning home, he would stop for dinner at a humble restaurant located between Modena and Maranello. His commitment to work was extreme and he had no plans to stop. Until in 1978, he suffered a serious kidney problem. He had to rest much longer than he could afford. He eventually recovered, but had to slow down. Changing his lifestyle and temperament became necessary. He used to be a tough man who didn't accept suggestions, but since that episode, he adopted a more open character and started to cultivate healthier habits. Ferrari had made personal and professional improvements. However, he would face new problems that would ultimately force him out of the race. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Icons emerge from the world of car racing. It's impossible not to think of racers who won trophies, broke records, and became stars like Niki Lauda, Juan Manuel Fangio, and Ayrton Senna. But there are also personalities who are just as, if not more, influential from a business role. Some had paths on the tracks, like New Zealander Bruce McLaren, founder of the McLaren team, and Frank Williams, co-creator of Williams. Among those names, one appears that forever revolutionized the industry, even when he had to deal with the worst torments. How did Enzo become one of the most important car entrepreneurs in the world? What is known about his stage as a driver? Is it true that Ferrari is the best car brand? To know in detail who we are talking about, we must start the engines and head out. Until the 14th of August 1988, the day he died. Enzo Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari's life began far from the tracks. He was born on February 18, 1898 in Modena, Italy. He spent his childhood in the Po Valley, a northern region characterized by farms and vineyards. While the boy spent hours playing with his older brother, Dino also paid a lot of attention to his father, Alfredo Ferrari. The subject was the owner of a company with many metal structures and used to command a group of up to 20 workers, in a workshop located on the ground floor of his house. From there, Enzo took the sense of work and responsibility as an example. In fact, Alfredo intended for his children to follow in his footsteps and inherit the company, but little Enzo had other interests, journalism and opera. However, at age 10, he discovered his true passion when his father took him and Dino to a car race. It was a sport that had gained momentum at that time thanks to society's fascination with vehicles. Those primitive machines did not go more than 80 kilometers per hour, but they crossed dusty roads and captivated an audience that came to enjoy the show. On that day, Enzo was the most captivated of all. He loved cars, speed, adrenaline, and he also got to see one of the first standards of the industry in action. Vincenzo Lancia, an engineer and driver who had founded his own company, Lancia. Enzo wanted to be like him and be part of that world, but first he had to respect his father's mandates. Along with his brother, Dino was sent to a mechanical engineering school, where they intended to prepare them to take over the family business. The older brother accepted his fate, but on the contrary, Enzo wanted to decide on his future. However, the Ferrari's plans were overshadowed. In 1914, when Italy entered the First World War, Dino was sent to the front to drive ambulances. He died of typhoid fever sometime later. Things were not going well at home. Alfredo, Enzo's father, died in 1916 from pneumonia. As a result, the company went bankrupt. Enzo still had his mother, Adalgisa, but no future prospects. In 1917, he had to enlist in the army. He tried to show his superiors that he could work as a mechanic, but they sent him to wander, mules. He also seemed to follow the sad end of his brother. He contracted pleurisy, a disease known to be deadly. Against all odds, he was able to recover, and at 20 years old he finished his service. In post-war Italy, Enzo had neither a job nor money. The crises that the country was going through did not offer him a hopeful outlook either. He leveraged his good relationship with his regiment's colonel, obtained a recommendation letter, and traveled to Turin, the heart of Italy's automotive industry at the time. Without wasting time, he looked for work at Fiat, which was already the most important company in the field, but they rejected him. This was a hard blow for Ferrari. As he would later recount in his autobiography, he was so helpless that he sat on a bench and cried. In addition to the lack of work and money, he seemed to have run out of dreams, but he retained a spirit that prevented him from giving up. A year later, Ferrari got a job at Costruzione Meccaniche Nazionale, known by the acronym Costruzione Meccaniche Nazionale, a small automotive factory in Milan. He wasn't paid much, but it was enough for him to buy a used Alfa Romeo with which he wanted to compete in races. His perseverance, dedication, and charisma earned him a promotion to driver at Costruzione Meccaniche Nazionale. His debut on the tracks took place in 1919 in the mountain race known as Parma. Poggio di Vercetto ranked 4th in the 3000 category and 10th in the overall standings. From there, he started gaining experience. In the environment, they recognized his energy, technique, and indomitable passion. At that time, motor racing was a risky activity. There were no safety measures like today, and accidents were constant. Ferrari knew how to face each challenge, and from each inconvenience he took a lesson. Among those who were impressed watching his performance was the director of Alfa Romeo. The man offered him to compete with his cars, and Enzo did not hesitate. In March 1920, he signed his first contract. For Ferrari, it was a fundamental step in his short career. However, he was only assigned to minor circuits. None of that gave him prestige or money. In need of income, he proposed to the Alfa Romeo authorities to work as a car salesman for select customers. He would even deliver them in person. His request was accepted, and he soon proved to be very skilled in business. Ferrari's pockets began to thicken, but he knew how to balance sales with his facet as a pilot. One of the turning points in his career happened in 1923. After the first edition of the Sage Circuit, he met Count Enrico Baracca and his wife Countess Polina Biancoli. She suggested he use the family's coat of arms, a rearing horse known as the Prancing Horse, in his races. In fact, it had been used on their son Francesco Baracca's airplane, an aviator who had been a hero of the First World War. The Countess said the coat of arms symbolized luck, tenacity, endurance, and speed. Ferrari took her advice, and from then on, it became his personal talisman. In addition to his skill on the tracks, Ferrari discovered that he had a broad vision of the automotive industry and what Alfa Romeo's cars and drivers needed. In 1929, he asked the authorities to allow him to create a racing team, and in December of that same year, he launched the Ferrari team. He ran during the first half. Like his idolized Lancia, he demonstrated that he could perform in more than one aspect of motor racing. Despite this, he knew he was not a master of the tracks. Where he really shone was as a businessman and as a manager. He was not an engineer or a mechanic, but he knew which professionals to turn to in order to perfect the vehicles. In turn, he gave his place to drivers he considered more suitable. He slowly transformed the industry. The publication of Auto Italiana named him the man to whom much of the current and vigorous revival of Italian motoring is owed. In January of 1932, Enzo officially said goodbye to racing and focused on what seemed to be his destiny. He was set to revolutionize the automotive industry. By the late 30s, Ferrari was already a standard-bearer of motor racing and a prominent piece in Alfa Romeo. That's why it came as a surprise when a company executive told him they would be cutting ties with him. Suddenly he lacked the corporate resources he once had. But that was just the prologue to a very tough time that would affect the entire country. Italy fell under the fascist regime of Benito Mussolini, and it was also a delicate time for all of Europe. In 1939, World War II began. Chaos, destruction, poverty intensified, and car races were suspended indefinitely. Was Enzo going to lose everything he had achieved through his hard work? Ferrari did not agree with fascism, but he had to collaborate with the government to continue working. And how did he do it? By building war material? Due to the threat of Allied bombings in Modena, he was forced to relocate the company to Maranello, situated 9.32 miles away. These were hard times for Ferrari. The sky only cleared in 1945, with the end of the conflict. Once again, he had to go through a post-war period with a country in ruins, but now he had mental and economic strength. The Marshall Plan created by the United States government to build Europe was also decisive. He was able to resume car manufacturing. The beginning of this new stage came to light in 1947, thanks to the 125F model. That was the first car to bear the Ferrari name and the first to sport the prancing horse as a distinctive seal. The impact of this vehicle was somewhat overshadowed in the first race, when a fuel pump broke and it had to stop before the finish line. However, Ferrari called it a promising failure, as it was still a before and after in his career and in the market. Ferrari did not attend either the debut race of the 125 or any other. He knew how to say that he had made that decision not to make the team nervous, but that modality gave mystery to his figure. Away from the flashes, Ferrari focused on surpassing his competitors and, above all, himself. He had the capital and prestige to attract the best technicians, who manufactured the slimmest and fastest vehicles. He also called for the most experienced pilots. In this way, the team prevailed on every circuit. Their dominance was absolute. The phenomenon extended beyond the tracks. Competing in international circuits cost $1 million a year, so it was necessary to generate extra income. Ferrari was convinced that he should sell touring cars. Unlike racing cars, they would have engines and chassis adapted for common roads. He was initially skeptical but ultimately agreed. It was the beginning of a business that allowed him to finance the races and make fortunes. There was no doubt about the greatness of Enzo Ferrari, whom everyone called Il Commendatore for his command and organization, but his successes contrasted with his private life. There he was, far from reaching the podium. In addition to cars, Ferrari always had a fascination for women. He dated numerous girls, but everything changed in 1921 when he started selling cars for Alfa Romeo and met Laura Dominica Garello. She was a 21-year-old girl about whom not much was known, but who had won over the businessman. She soon revealed herself as a woman with a great temperament, who helped him endure arduous years of struggle. They got married in 1923, but the marital life was problematic. The first to realize was Ferrari himself. When he brought his mother to live with them, the two women fought incessantly. He had to restrain them whenever he returned from a long day at the factory. Besieged by the upheavals within the home and wanting to evade responsibilities. In 1929, he already had a lover, Lina Linardi, a secretary from another company. He was 46 years old and she was 10 years younger. That didn't stop a relationship that he wanted to keep clandestine, although it became a rumor among his closest circles. Nevertheless, Ferrari stood by Laura. Especially from 1932, when their son Alfredo was born. The businessman named him after his father and brother. In fact, he also got the nickname Dino. He was the reason for his retirement as a pilot. He was ready to be as good a father as his had been, but fate had another unpleasant surprise in store for him. When he was 3 years old, the boy was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, a disease that would cause the deterioration of his central nervous system. Ferrari found the situation irreversible, and it was a difficult setback for them. At work, he refused to give up. He consulted top doctors. They all told him his son would die around the age of 20. Despite the adverse outlook, he prepared him to be his successor in the company. The boy studied mechanical engineering and economics in Switzerland and soon was working in the company contributing designs. He remained active until shortly before his death in June of 1956, when he was 24 years old. Ferrari was devastated. From then on, he visited Dino's grave before each workday. The pain might have brought them closer to Laura, but it didn't. She suffered from bipolar disorder and the loss of her son worsened her condition. As usual, Ferrari found comfort in Lina. With her, he had another son. In 1945, whom he named Piero il Commendatore, he had lunch with both of them at the house they had in Sette Cani. Enzo Ferrari led a double life, but he never neglected his empire, an empire that would soon also receive a big blow. Ferrari was part of the most famous and risky competitions, including the Mille Miglia. The Miglia was created in 1927, and for years it was considered the most attractive endurance race, although also the most dangerous. It took place on roads open to traffic, so millions of people could leave their homes and enjoy. Watching how the drivers raced through half of Italy, the cars started in Brescia and crossed Rome, forming a round trip in the shape of an 8. Thus, they had to travel the 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles. No racing team failed to participate, and Ferrari was no exception. In fact, it had won on more than one occasion. On May 12, 1957, the Commendatore was anticipating a new triumph, or rather, he urgently needed a victory. The loss of Dino was still recent, and in March of that year, Eugenio Castellotti, one of his best drivers, had also died. To complicate things, it happened during training. For the new edition of the Mille Miglia, Enzo had 5 cars and some of his most notable drivers. Among them, Alfonso de Portago, a Spanish aristocrat who shone behind the wheel. According to his close ones, the racer was not convinced to participate because he understood the risks of so many tight turns and unstable road conditions, but Enzo convinced him. At first everything was going wonderfully. For Ferrari, the prominent figure was Piero Taruffi, the veteran of the group who promised to retire after the competition. The subject managed to take the first place, and on the podium he was accompanied by 2 other colleagues from the team, Wolfgang von Trips and Olivier Gendebien. But the joys were overshadowed by what happened to de Portago. He was driving the 335S model, the most powerful Ferrari, 35 kilometers left to return to Brescia. He lost control, flipped over a ditch, and bounced to fall on a pile of spectators and crashed into a pole. The driver and his co-driver Edmund Nelson died, as well as 9 people, including 5 children. The tragedy at the Mille Miglia shocked the world. The organizers had to cancel the competition forever. As for Ferrari, they had to face a trial that lasted for years. It was discovered that the cars had used tires that were not suitable for those speeds. This led to Enzo being accused of unpremeditated homicide. The businessman had to invest millions in lawyers, and his reputation was left in a more than delicate situation. After 4 years of appeals, he managed to get the charges dropped. Ferrari managed to recover from the tragedy and knew how to face all the problems the company experienced in the following years. He possessed ample strength and character to confront the challenges on the tracks or in the offices. Until health problems began, and that's how our story comes back to the beginning. During the 80s, Ferrari's health entered a spiral of deterioration. At the same time, his life was marked by other episodes. Dino's other son Piero followed in his footsteps and began working in the company. The presence of the young man displeased Laura, who used to violently enter the company to ask about the bastard. But he always had his father's support, who eventually appointed him as the general manager. As for Laura, she died in 1978. That year, Enzo married Lina, who until then had been his lover. He also became a grandfather when Piero married and had children. Ferrari could cling to his clan and work, but nothing prevented his health from betraying him. In 1988, he began to suffer from kidney problems. The pains were becoming more and more intense, so intense that he found it hard to move. The seriousness of his situation was confirmed in June of that year, when Pope John Paul II came to Maranello to visit him. It promised to be a unique encounter, but the Commendatore could not receive him. He was very sick. Knowing that he was nearing his end, he closed his last deals. When the company was going through a financial crisis, he approached Fiat to give them 50% of the rights. In June, he resumed contacts with their authorities to sell them the remaining 30%. Within weeks, Ferrari stopped leaving his Modena home and was under the care of Piero and his daughter-in-law. He had to undergo dialysis treatment, which annoyed him. He asked to be left to die in peace. And the end came on the 14th of August, 1988. He stayed in bed with his family around him and passed away at 90 years old. Just as he had requested to Piero, the funeral was held a day later and only 12 people attended. The coffin was placed in a crypt of the family pantheon in San Cataldo, Modena. Many thought he would want to be located near Dino, but he had asked to be placed near his father's remains. Ferrari. The man had died, but Ferrari, the brand, would gain more and more strength. After his death, Ferrari transcended through a legacy that continues to this day. After dark years, the team dominated the second half of the 90s and part of the 2000s. Here the key was the driver Michael Schumacher, who became its most representative face. More positive and negative times came, but the brand never lost recognition. Off the racetracks, Ferrari established itself as synonymous with high-end cars and is an essential part of pop culture. A machine enjoyed by the powerful and coveted by every mortal. From humble beginnings, Enzo Ferrari's life was filled with glory and controversy. He built an empire and elevated the entire automotive industry. His dedication became an inspiration that transcends engines. And he showed us that the most important thing is not to be the fastest, but to be the most consistent and never stop accelerating.